poor Henry's French accent, which was unique, resembling the warbling of birds, if birds ever warbled with a stuttering nasal intonation. Our third partner was Roger P. de la S., the most Scandinavian-looking of Provençal squires, fair and 6 feet high, as became a descendant of sea-roving Northmen, authoritative, incisive, wittily scornful, with a comedy in 3 acts in his breast pocket, and in his breast a heart blighted by a hopeless passion for his beautiful cousin, married to a wealthy hide and tallow merchant. He used to take us to lunch at their house without ceremony. I admired the good lady's sweet patience. The husband was a conciliatory soul with a great fund of resignation which he expended on Roger's friends. I suspect he was secretly horrified at these invasions. But it was a Carlist salon, and as such we were made welcome. The possibility of raising Catalonia in the interests of the Rey Neto, who had just then crossed the Pyrenees, was much discussed there. Don Carlos, no doubt, must have had many queer friends. It is the common lot of all pretenders, but amongst them none more extravagantly fantastic than the Tremolino Syndicate, which used to meet in a tavern on the quays of the old port. The antique city of Massilia had surely never, since the days of the earliest Phoenicians, known an odder set of ship-owners. We met to discuss and settle the plan of operations for each voyage of the Tremolino. In these operations a banking house, too, was concerned, a very respectable banking house. But I am afraid I shall end by saying too much. Ladies, too, were concerned. I am really afraid I am saying too much. All sorts of ladies, some old enough to know better than to put their trust in princes, others young and full of illusions. One of these last was extremely amusing in the imitations she gave us in confidence of various highly placed personages she was perpetually rushing off to Paris to interview in the interests of the cause. Poor El Rey! For she was a Carlist, and of Basque blood at that, with something of a lioness in the expression of her courageous face, especially when she let her hair down, and with the volatile little soul of a sparrow dressed in fine Parisian feathers, which had the trick of coming off disconcertingly at unexpected moments. But her imitations of a Parisian personage, very highly placed indeed, as she represented him standing in the corner of a room with his face to the wall, rubbing the back of his head and moaning helplessly, "Rita, you are the death of me," were enough to make one, if young and free from cares, split one's sides laughing. She had an uncle still living, a very effective Carlist too, the priest of a little mountain parish in Guipuzcoa. As the sea-going member of the syndicate, whose plans depended greatly on Dona Rita's information, I used to be charged with humbly affectionate messages for the old man. These messages I was supposed to deliver to the Aragonese muleteers, who were sure to await at certain times the Tremolino in the neighbourhood of the Gulf of Rosas, for faithful transportation inland, together with the various unlawful goods landed secretly from under the Tremolino's hatches. Well, now I have really let out too much, as I feared I should in the end, as to the usual contents of my sea-cradle. But let it stand. And if anybody remarks cynically that I must have been a promising infant in those days, let that stand too. I am concerned but for the good name of the Tremolino, and I affirm that a ship is ever guiltless of the sins, transgressions, and follies of her men. Chapter 42. It was not Tremolino's fault that the syndicate depended so much on the wit and wisdom and the information of Donna Rita. She had taken a little furnished house on the Prado for the good of the cause, por el rey. She was always taking little houses for somebody's good, for the sick or the sorry, for broken-down artists, cleaned-out gamblers, temporarily unlucky speculators. Vieux amis, old friends, as she used to explain apologetically, with a shrug of her fine shoulders. Whether Don Carlos was one of the old friends, too, it's hard to say. More unlikely things have been heard of in smoking rooms. All I know is that one evening, entering incautiously the salon of the little house just after the news of a considerable Carlist success had reached the faithful, I was seized round the neck and waist and whirled recklessly 3 times round the room to the crash of upsetting furniture and the humming of a valse tune in a warm contralto voice. When released from the dizzy embrace, I sat down on the carpet, suddenly, without affectation. In this unpretentious attitude I became aware that J.M.K.B. had followed me into the room, elegant, fatal, correct and severe, in a white tie and large shirt front. In answer to his politely sinister, prolonged glance of inquiry, I overheard Donna Rita murmuring, with some confusion and annoyance, "Vous êtes bête, mon cher. Voyons. Ça n'a aucune conséquence." Well content in this case to be of no particular consequence, I had already about me the elements of some worldly sense. Rearranging my collar, which, truth to say, ought to have been a round one above a short jacket, but was not, I observed felicitously that I had come to say good-bye, being ready to go off to sea that very night with the Tremolino. Our hostess, slightly panting yet, and just a shade dishevelled, turned tartly upon J.M.K.B., desiring to know when he would be ready to go off by the Tremolino, or, in another way, in order to join the royal headquarters. Did he intend, she asked ironically, to wait for the very eve of the entry into Madrid? Thus, by a judicious exercise of tact and asperity, we re-established the atmospheric equilibrium of the room long before I left them a little before midnight. Now tenderly reconciled, to walk down to the harbour and hail the Tremolino by the usual soft whistle from the edge of the quay. It was our signal, invariably heard by the ever-watchful Dominic, the padrone. He would raise a lantern silently to light my steps along the narrow, springy plank of our primitive gangway. "And so we are going off," he would murmur directly my foot touched the deck. I was the harbinger of sudden departures, but there was nothing in the world sudden enough to take Dominic unawares. His thick black moustaches, curled every morning with hot tongs by the barber at the corner of the quay, seemed to hide a perpetual smile. But nobody, I believe, had ever seen the true shape of his lips. From the slow, imperturbable gravity of that broad-chested man, you would think he had never smiled in his life. In his eyes lurked a look of perfectly remorseless irony, as though he had been provided with an extremely experienced soul.